in the air. I went out and had to check on a couple of houses, and I don't know if it's just me, but when you get at least just enough rain where that it smells like rain. Just in the spring, when the grass is just starting to grow and you got the fresh grass, just rain kind of thing going. My cows like that too. So, last one about authority. Then we talked about spiritual authority as well. And I think that throughout these lessons, we're going to kind of try the world see, and hopefully what the Christian sees with respect to authority. And we'll hopefully, gather a perspective of maybe life and the Christian's perspective of what authority is, quote, all about. And I guess the overall limits of authority are different. They're just understand the world views things the way the world views things, and how we as Christians might be able to communicate a little bit more fair, have doing a little bit of comparison, contrasting of those two things. Anybody remember what authority is? We said it had two basic components. One of them is power. Well, that's part of the power. Yeah. Basically, it's that you have the power and the ability to exercise the power to, as Mom said, control the actions of others, the direction of an organization, whatever your particular authority is over. You have the power, and the authority is granted for. We talked about God is ultimately here, and then all authority was given to him after he had completed his earthly mission. And then we're able to have the person that has authority can then delegate authority, can exercise the authority that they're granted by the person who's actually has the authority. They can exercise that power and influence that goes along with that authority. That's very important. Usurping additional authority because I want more power, I want more influence, I want whatever. This morning we're going to expand that a little bit. Is there a need in society, for example? There's a need for authority. Why? Chaos. Now let me get this straight. Without authority, there's chaos, and chaos is a lack of authority. A little circular logic going on here. So let's define it a little, drill it down. We're talking about the most powerful rule. It sounds like they have, but they still have it. Doesn't matter that they took it, they still have it. So is chaos the absence of authority, or is it the absence of legitimate authority that's able to control society and set norms of things, so that success is disorder, maybe? Disorganization. And Arnold, we think as Christians, but let's try to think like society might think. There's no rules. Well, what does that mean? You just do whatever you want. Do whatever you want. Well, what if I have a problem with what you're doing? It doesn't matter on this. If there are no rules, then there's no right, and more importantly, there's no wrong. Eventually, now on the surface that sounds, to society at least, that sounds, that's just like everybody does whatever they want. Nobody can tell you not to do it. Somebody else does because it directly affects them. And now there's this struggle for power, and eventually the stronger club beats the little club down, and the big club gets to say, okay, I get to set a rule. And authority is reestablished, whether it's legitimate or illegitimate. The strong. Now that doesn't sound very good, right? That doesn't sound very good, especially if you're one of the, quote, weak, if I'm one of the what they're big. So basically, in a society that has, quote, no authority, there's chaos, there's anarchy. Anarchy is lack of governance, okay? No sense of responsibility. I think that's one of the key things seem to miss in that concept of, whatever you feel is right, then that's right for you. But then if I feel that something else is right, well, then that's right for me. By the way, in that particular situation, who is the authority, by the way? Well, in that person's mind, though, that's right for me, but you don't feel that way. So that's not right for you, but you feel about something else a certain way, and that's the individual is. That's exactly right. They're saying, I make up the rules that authority. I make up my own rules. Well, obviously that won't work. Daily Bible. Own sight. That's right. And we're going to talk about that. Yeah, that's exactly right. Obviously, in a society, therefore, there's a need for authority in the spiritual realm. But I want to talk about that is true. And Mom kind of, started that thought process, so this will segue right into that. Let's talk about the nature of man. When man was created, Adam and Eve, when they were created, God was the authority, right? He still is the authority, but in that moment, he was the authority. And God only gave him one rule, right? What's the second one? That was not really a rule. Okay, I'll go with it, Mom. Be fruitful and multiply. All right? I don't guess they had any trouble with that one. We don't know of any trouble with that one. But that's the one I was thinking of. Until I was so lovingly derailed. I had a lot of momentum right up until that point, and then all of a sudden, there it is. With you. You never grow up, do you? So anyway, that other rule, don't eat. God, not what's the very next thing that happens? What? But why not? So God realizes that, that question's going to come. Might as well answer it right off the bat. Don't eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. When you eat it, the day you eat it, you will surely die. Only that one thing, be fruit or multiply. Those are the only two things. Okay, so I guess the question that comes to my mind is, was man able to differentiate at that time between good and evil? Nope. I'm talking before we eat fruit, was man able to differentiate between good and evil? Or a better question, I guess, because this obviously, your brains are spinning in pretty violent orbit, right and wrong. I think I like that. Did anybody else understand what was said? He told them two things. I guess they could have, they were able to differentiate between we should be fruitful and multiply or we shouldn't, yeah. But on the case we're looking at, could they differentiate whether they should or should not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil? And Pat's answer to that, and I absolutely agree, yeah. Yeah, they should. Now, for some of us, I think that's an aha moment. Well, they didn't have any idea what was good or evil until they ate of the tree that was good or evil. No. They knew what was right and wrong because God said, this is wrong. And I like that, Stacey, because this is where we're going to go with that particular thing. You know, the Proverbs say, when the first person makes an argument, it sounds good. Until when? Until another comes to rebut it. Whew, wow, I think we're starting to bubble around a little bit on this. Satan came and he made a different argument. No, you're not going to die. What you're going to do is you're going to learn all the stuff that God knows. You're going to be like God. God doesn't want you to be like him because he has all the authority. He has all the authority. Now, if you're like him, you can have some of the authority. But man was able to determine what was right and what was wrong. Now, let's look at some scriptures that I think validate that. Like I say, this lesson was kind of, but I'm trying to, because I think I think it's healthy to do that. And number two, I think it's, at least in my opinion, it's opened my eyes to some other thought processes that I have. A moral agent capable of determining good from evil, right from wrong, based on what at the very beginning. He didn't tell him, you can't eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and then it was impossible for them to actually do it. God didn't state that as a fact of the, there was was a barrier and they couldn't eat from the tree because God said I can't eat from the tree. And I'm trying so hard to eat, but I can't eat. No, that wasn't what happened. God said, don't eat. Don't do that. Don't. Which gave them the ability to do if they chose. Moral free agent there. Now, while man has the capacity, the authority for him to make the distinction between good and evil, what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at Jeremiah 10:23. I think that's a good place to start. Jeremiah 10:23. First person that gets that, read out as loud as you can. Okay? The ESV version says, I know, O Lord, that the way of man is not in himself, that it is not in man who walks to direct his steps. It's not in man to be able. I'm going to let you think about that for just a second. Man is not able to direct his steps. Is that absolute? What? Good. What's correct? In accordance with God's will. Good. And I'm so glad you picked up on that. I hope others picked up on it and just didn't, say it. It's not within man to direct his steps correctly because God's will is coming from God to man, and God told man what he expected and what he wanted him to do. Now, is it within man's ability to act upon the direction of God? Absolutely. Absolutely. Man could live in accordance with God's will perfectly. He could. Christ did. And so it's not a question of can man do it? He can do it. He just can't do it without knowing what the direction needs to be. In other words, in the absence of God's direction, in the absence of Scripture, in the absence of the Word of God, man will never figure out how to direct his life. Never. And not only will he not figure out how to direct his life so that ultimately he'll be with God in heaven, he will not successfully direct his life, period, according to society even. He will make mistakes. He will make bad decisions, bad choices, bad turns. Now, do we as Christians make bad choices, bad turns? Well, of course we do. But there are a lot of people, quote, non-Christians, that probably in good moral conscience do a lot of things that are not in accordance with God's will. But they are not living their lives to please God. They don't know God, maybe, quote unquote. Romans chapter 1, and anyway, that's a whole different deal. Worship. And man's just not capable of doing it, even though he's just kind of saying they ought to know better. Right. So I think that's the beginning of the argument that, yes, we're free moral agents. God gave us the ability to do the right thing and to know right from wrong. And after the fall, we know good from evil. If down even further, we know good from evil. But we still without direction from God. It's not within us to do it. Another passage, we won't look all these up because I want to try to move through some stuff. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 12 says, there is a way that seems right to man, but its end is the way of death. It seems right. The people that are going down this path, they're not thinking, man, I'm running headlong straight into the abyss. That's not what they're thinking. They're thinking this is the way to go. As a matter of fact, the more they think it's the way to go, the more they're trying to encourage other people to do it. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 21 says, the world through its wisdom alone cannot know God. Cannot know God through its own wisdom. Now, for those of you who are struggling with, well, what about what Paul said in Romans chapter 1? I had to work through that one too. It's the only reason I bring it up. Well, it's because the creation screams out the existence. God is real just based on looking at the creation. You can know God is real. And so when you say God is not real, that's man's wisdom. And so 1 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul says to the Corinthians, no, that's not, let me give you a little bit more. Apart from God, that wisdom cannot be known. You just won't ever get there. So I guess what we're saying is the absence of universal conformity to a single concept of morality, religious practice, indicates that the knowledge of right and wrong does not dwell within man. It has to come from outside of him. It has to. Man needs God. Without God, man cannot live a successful life, and that's in or out of the church. And some people say, well, I know some people that, and I look, I know some people that are non-Christians, and boy, they've got wealth like you would not believe, and influence, and power, and yada, 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 yada. Well, the problem is you're conveying to them success based on those things, and that's not success under God's definition of success. Okay? Just an idea. Lose your soul. Yeah. The history of man, when he is left to vanity of his own reason, displays his desperate need for divine authority, don't you think? Romans 1:21 through 28 says, without God, man became foolish, in verse 22, unclean in verse 24, vile in his passions, verse 26, debased in his mind, verse 28. This is really an important one. I see it going on in society a whole lot right now. And that's, I want to dwell on it for just a second or two here. If you deny God, ultimately, you are going to go down a path that results in you defiling yourself. Get this. Defiling yourself shamefully, publicly, and here's the last one, sexually. That's tough, isn't it? But I think all you have to do is look at society. You look at society and what's happened over the last about 10 years. The more society denies God, the more they become vile publicly. They do things that are despicable. If we look back, and I'm talking about if you did the acts that people are doing now publicly 25 years ago, society would have said there's something wrong with you. Society would have said, shame on you. How could you possibly be doing what you're doing? Shame on you. And they're not even Christians. Anyway, you can hear that's a big axe for me. Sorry about that. I get a little excited. But that's an important one right there. And that's happening all around us. And that's what that says right there. That's what that says. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18 through 21 says, the wisdom of man is foolishness in comparison to the wisdom of God. If you think about the time that this was written, the Greek philosophers had already, basically come and gone. All of their stuff was, already written and everything. And the age of knowledge had already, basically gone. And so Paul is writing this to the Corinthians at a time that's centuries later. He says, the wisdom of God, or the wisdom of man, is foolishness. Is absolute foolishness compared to the wisdom of God. Ephesians 4:17 through 19 says, the world apart from God lives in futility, with their understanding darkened because of their ignorance. Now, what's interesting about this particular passage is they don't think they're ignorant. You ever talk to somebody who, conveyed their massive intelligence on something, and the more they talked, the more you thought in your mind, you have no idea what you're talking about. Because I actually do know what you're talking about. I mean, I know the subject area you're talking about, and you don't know what you're talking about. Well, that's kind of the way these people were. They thought they knew something, but it was ignorance. They were ignorant. More than just that, I think that's absolute. That's absolute. But their thought was darkened because of their perceived knowledge. Those of you who saw that movie with us about, the Genesis account and everything, it's a really good movie. Y'all ought to see that when you get a chance, or buy it on DVD or whatever. But what happens to academics especially, this happens a lot, and Chris and I talk about this all the time. What happens to academics is they get to a point where they have arrived at the conclusion of the matter in their own mind, and now any additional information is automatically discarded. There is nothing more to learn to say, I have arrived at the final conclusion. Don't bother me with new facts. And I think that's what we're talking about. These people are like, well, I'm not open to any new ideas about God or gods or what you're supposed to do with gods or God or act. No, I've come to the conclusion in my mind as to how I'm supposed to act in that particular thing, and so I don't really need to know anymore. I'm a self-proclaimed expert on that topic, like we were talking before. Most serious consequence that exists with the lack of authority in society is the same problem as a lack of authority in the spiritual realm. Without authority, religion is completely meaningless. Unless God, one, exists, and two, is in authority over all things, religion is totally meaningless. Why would I say that? I want to make sure that you're kind of, I'm following Jason on that. Why is that? That's good. I mean, I like that and everything, but let's take it one step higher than that, if possible. The idea, well, I tell you what, let's take it back to where we started. Without authority in society, what happens? Chaos, okay? But then that second part of it, there's anarchy. Everybody, there's nobody actually in authority to govern at all. Well, so if there's no God, or God doesn't have absolute authority over everything, religion's meaningless because you're serving a God who's not in charge of all of it. And so what do you do with the balance of it? What about the rest of it? Isn't this what the pantheistic people were trying to do? Well, okay. Man, we need that sunshine. We need sun. So let's go ahead and set up an idol deal for the God of the sun. Let's worship him at appropriate times, of course. But then we need rain. Set up God of rain and worship him or her. Appropriate times, of course. Next thing you know, we got 10,000 gods because we don't want to leave anybody out. And after all, isn't that exactly what Paul ran into? Isn't that what he ran into during his missionary journey? Where was he when he did that? I forgot. He was in Athens. He was in Greece. That's right. And they had to the unknown God. Why? They didn't want to leave anybody out. That's why. But you see, with that idea that God isn't in charge, doesn't have authority over all things, religion is worthless because you're never going to be able to satisfy the need of all those gods. You'll never be able to satisfy the requirements of all those gods. You'll never accomplish your goal. There's no way to accomplish your goal. Does that make any sense at all? And that's the nice thing about it, isn't it? I say nice thing about it. I'm not trying to be facetious, but that's the wonderful thing about it, is God is supreme. God is the only God. God is in authority over all things. He created all things. In him, all things hold together, the scriptures say. I love that part ever since we learned about, melanin. Is that what it is? I forgot. Yeah. I love that. I taught this class and y'all learned about that. Remember that? little cross of stuff holds all the DNA together. Holds everything together. So the need to respect authority is exact equivalent to respect for God. You can't respect God and despise authority. You can't love authority and not love God. Anybody disagree? Think about it. Is it possible to love God and not love authority? Nope, I want love. Here's why that's important. Respect is out of obligation. Love is out of commitment. Well, that's love. I mean, see, I don't like to fracture that word. I really don't. I'm going to tell you right now, and this is a whole different class. But as Christians, we are to agape to the best of our ability in every single situation, every single person, every single thing. Agape. That is the standard. We are to agape. That's have godly love. Perfect love is another word for that because God is perfect. We're to have perfect love. Now, people realized that we were falling short of that standard and created other words to talk about situational love. People did that. That's a whole different class. It's a good class, though. I'd love to do that, that class. I think I did that class once. And we had a lot of interesting discussion, actually. Remember that, Mom? Yeah, that's a pretty good class. The effects of respecting authority include the following, and then we're going to kind of talk about this just a little bit and sum up. The effects of respecting authority include all laws are immediately important. Obedience becomes a way of life. Character and self-discipline are produced. Let's go over those again. All laws immediately become important. Obedience becomes a way of life. Character and self-discipline are produced. When we use the word authority, a lot of times what we're thinking is we're talking about people like police, like the military, like the President of the United States, and you fill in all the blanks. Let's start at the highest levels here. God, right? Now, does anybody have a challenge if God's the authority, okay? God's the authority. I almost said that kind of cute, didn't I? You like that, Diana? God's the authority. Okay. All laws immediately become important. All of God's laws become immediately important. Obedience becomes a way of life. I give up my individuality, myself, and obey God. That's my way of life, is to obey God. Character and self-discipline are produced. I develop godly character. I become more disciplined in my walk. I don't think any of us have a problem with that one, do we? I mean, if we say, okay, the authority is God, and so we're going to obey the laws, and the laws are important, and we're going to obey the laws, and I'm going to be more self-disciplined, and I'm going to have more character because of that. I don't think any of us have a problem with that. But what we do have a problem with is when we bring that down to the social level. Jason Fly had a real problem with this one for a period of time in his life, a real problem with it. Jason Fly would say things to himself. I hear the self-talk even today that I used to use. Well, that law's just stupid. That's a stupid law. Why in the world do I have to stop at a stop sign when there is no other vehicle for 100 million miles? There's nobody. I'm out in the middle of nowhere, midnight. There's not another soul out here. Why do I? It's a law. You stop. I took it. Boy, I backed that one up. Stupid laws. And boy, some real important laws became real stupid laws to me. Then all of a sudden So the idea is authority is important. It's important. Law. Any sense? Absolutely. Absolutely. You talk to any school teacher these days. And the sad truth is, I've actually heard school teachers say, literally, until they put those metal detectors in so that kids had to walk through a metal detector to even get into the building, I was afraid to go in my classroom. I'm still afraid to go in my classroom because the kids like saying or whatever and get up and come and actively combat me. I'm like, well, high school is tough. No, I'm talking about elementary school. And Romans chapter 1 says what will happen. And it's happening. Let's get back to that. Here I'm grinding that X again. That's exactly what's happening. Charge. Game's already. He will always be in control because he has all the authority and all the power. Thanks be to God that we have that. I don't know what people that are non-Christians do with all that stuff. Worry themselves sick. That's all I know. Just worry themselves sick. Any other comments? Once in a while. Yes, real quick.